Behind fences on Russia's Black Sea coast sits a palace with its own road, guards, helipad, and a paper trail that keeps bending away from one name. Officially, Vladimir Putin looks almost ordinary. A state salary, modest disclosures, the image of a lifelong public servant. But that's the trick, right? If he doesn't own the palace on paper, if his name isn't on the assets, then who does own Russia's money? To answer that, you have to rewind, past the presidency, past the propaganda, to a moment when an obscure ex-KGB officer found the levers of a collapsing city and learned how power could hide. When the Soviet system cracked apart, Putin came home from Dresden to Leningrad, soon renamed St. Petersburg, with the resume of a former intelligence officer and no obvious future. The empire he'd served was gone. The new Russia was chaotic, hungry, and up for grabs. That sounds dramatic now, but for people living through it, it felt smaller and uglier than that. Shelves were empty, salaries vanished, rules changed every week. He found his opening through Anatoly Sobchak, his former law professor, who had just become one of the city's biggest political figures. Sobchak needed people who knew foreign systems, spoke languages, and could operate in gray areas without flinching. Putin fit that job. He entered City Hall and soon took charge of the Committee for External Relations, a title that sounds dry until you see what it actually meant. This office touched almost everything that mattered. Foreign firms wanting space in the city had to go through it. Property access moved through it. Permits moved through it. Export channels moved through it. In a city trying to survive the wreckage of the Soviet collapse, that wasn't paperwork. That was the switchboard. And then came the deal that still hangs over his early career. St. Petersburg faced severe food shortages. Officials set up a plan. Local companies would export raw materials like oil, timber, and metals, then use the proceeds to bring food back into the city. On paper, it sounded like emergency management. In practice, investigators later said huge amounts of the promised food never arrived. A city council member, Marina Salya, led an inquiry. She gathered documents, followed contracts, and argued that large sums had vanished through lightly built firms tied to people in Putin's orbit. Her commission recommended that Putin be removed. She claimed the city lost millions and got almost nothing back. Putin denied wrongdoing. Supporters dismissed the inquiry as politics. Prosecutors never turned it into a real reckoning. That matters because the pattern already seems visible. Money moved through other hands. Responsibility diffused outward. Formal ownership stayed blurry, and the man at the center kept enough distance to deny the whole thing. There were more allegations after that. Investigators like Andrei Zhikov later tied Putin's committee to other suspicious projects, including claims involving construction funds and companies that allegedly received money for work that never got done. Some of those accusations went even further, into ties with organized crime and laundering networks. Those claims remain disputed, and many never reached court. But think about what keeps repeating here. Not neat proof, not clean convictions, a fog of contracts, fronts, signatures, loyal intermediaries, and stalled cases. Sobchak protected him. That part is clear. Even when scandal closed in, Putin stayed in place. And when Sobchak later faced pressure of his own, Putin didn't abandon him. Few people realize how much that mattered. In Russia's elite, loyalty isn't a nice trait. It's a signal. It tells powerful people whether you'll protect them when the floor starts moving. In a normal system, a scandal like the missing food case might have buried a bureaucrat. In this one, it became part of his audition, because what Moscow would soon notice wasn't the smoke around him. It was that he survived it, stayed useful, and never broke rank. Moscow opened in 1996, after Sobchak lost power in St. Petersburg. Putin followed the route so many ambitious operators took in that decade, straight toward the Kremlin. where weak institutions, private fortunes, and political panic were starting to fuse into one system. His rise looked almost absurdly fast. He moved through the presidential administration, then into the security world, then higher still, until Boris Yeltsin named him prime minister in August 1999. That speed wasn't random. Yeltsin's inner circle needed someone dependable. The 1990s privatization era had created vast fortunes, bitter enemies, and a long list of questions about who stole what. The president's family and allies needed protection after Yeltsin left office. They weren't searching for a reformer. They were searching for a shield, and Putin had already shown what mattered most to them. He had stayed loyal to Sobchak when others scattered. He had helped him when prosecutors closed in. That move would later prove decisive. To Yeltsin's people, it answered the only question they cared about. If pressure came, would he protect the man above him? Still, there was one problem. Almost nobody in Russia knew who he was. He had titles, but not a public story. He needed one fast. Then Russia changed in a matter of nights. In September 1999, apartment buildings in Moscow and other cities exploded while people slept. Hundreds died. Panic moved across the country. The official line blamed Chechen militants, and the bombings became part of the case for a new war in Chechnya. Putin, then still a new prime minister, stepped into that fear with a hard, punishing message. Suddenly, he wasn't a faceless official. He was the man promising order. Critics and investigators later raised deep questions about those bombings, especially after the Ryazan incident, where residents found sacks in a basement and authorities first treated the discovery like a live bomb. The FSB later described it as an exercise. Several journalists, former officials, and researchers argued that the story didn't add up. Duma efforts to investigate were blocked. People who pushed too hard often paid for it. Some were jailed. Some were threatened. Some ended up dead. None of that proves every allegation, but it tells you how tightly the truth was controlled. For the Kremlin, the immediate result was obvious. Fear turned into political fuel. War lifted Putin's image. An obscure administrator became the face of stability almost overnight, and by the end of that year, Yeltsin resigned, naming him acting president. Then came one of the clearest transactions in modern Russian politics. On his first day as president, Putin signed a decree granting Yeltsin immunity from prosecution. That protected the family he had been chosen to protect. Around the same time, old investigations circling Putin's years in St. Petersburg faded out. Cases stalled. Files disappeared into the system. The bargain was simple, and it held. Looking back, this is the real turning point. He didn't just win an election. He inherited the center of the state during a moment of fear, then used that center to settle debts, erase dangers, and lock in loyalty. Imagine being in their shoes. If you were one of the men who had carved up the country in the 1990s, this wasn't just succession. This was survival. And once survival was secure, the next move came into view. The old tycoons who thought they were partners were about to learn the new rules, because the Kremlin now had a leader who didn't plan to share power with anyone strong enough to challenge him. At first, plenty of Russia's richest men thought Putin might actually help them. The 1990s had been a feeding frenzy. Assets changed hands in rushed privatizations, debts got traded for power, and law often looked optional. Business wanted order. Western governments wanted to believe this former KGB officer might turn Russia into something cleaner, more predictable, maybe even normal. For a brief moment, that hope looked real. Putin met the oligarchs early and gave them a deal. Keep your wealth. Keep your companies. Just stay out of politics. Don't fund opposition parties. Don't build an independent power base. Don't confuse private money with public authority. On the surface, that sounded almost reasonable. After all, a state should rule, not billionaires. But then the rule revealed its real meaning. Wealth was allowed only on political lease. Most of them understood. Some left. Some bowed. Some learned to speak less. A few even got richer under the new arrangement, because loyalty opened doors that markets never could. The people around Putin didn't need to nationalize every asset. They needed something more useful: the right to decide who could keep an asset, who could lose it, and who had to pay to stay safe. Then Mikhail Khodorkovsky pushed too far. He wasn't just rich. He ran Yukos, one of Russia's biggest oil companies, and he had started talking openly about corruption, state dysfunction, and the need for a different future. In 2003, at a Kremlin meeting, he challenged the system in front of Putin and cameras. Later, he said he accused Putin's inner circle of building a state where corruption had become the method of rule. That moment didn't just offend the president. It broke the one rule that mattered most. Khodorkovsky was acting like an independent political player. The answer came fast. He was arrested that year, charged with fraud and tax evasion. Yukos was hit with crushing claims, driven into collapse, and broken apart. Its main assets ended up largely with state-controlled Rosneft. Khodorkovsky went to prison for a decade. You can argue over every legal detail, and the Kremlin did. But the message landed perfectly. Russia's richest man had been shown, in public, that property rights now ran through the presidency. That's when the model changed. Before Putin, oligarchs often looked like owners who influenced the state. Under Putin, the state chose which owners were allowed to exist. Business didn't disappear, it got domesticated. Exiles and former insiders described the new order in blunt terms. Valery Morozov called it a pay-to-play system. Karen Dawisha wrote about a network where wealth and political power fed each other from the start. Sergei Kolesnikov described the idea of a krisha, a roof. In plain English, it means protection. If your business has a roof, someone powerful shields it. If it doesn't, you're exposed. Tax police can appear. Prosecutors can appear. Contracts can vanish. Partners can flip. Few people realize that in this kind of system, ownership papers matter less than the hand over them. So the people who thrived weren't the boldest entrepreneurs. They were the safest custodians, friends from St. Petersburg, security men, trusted billionaires, state company bosses. Men like Arkady Rottenberg didn't need to govern Russia themselves. They just needed to hold assets, win contracts, and understand where their position came from. Their fortunes looked private. Their dependence was not. That's why the usual question, does Putin personally own this company, can miss the point. He doesn't need his name on the deed if the person on the deed answers when called. He doesn't need a formal title if managers, governors, courts, and police all know who decides outcomes. Think about it. In a normal market, wealth buys influence. In Putin's Russia, influence grants temporary custody of wealth. And once that arrangement locked into place, the country's biggest firms stopped acting like separate centers of power. They became instruments. Some were state-owned, others stayed nominally private. But the border between public and private blurred until it almost stopped meaning anything. The people holding the assets could use them, enjoy them, even pass some of them around. What they couldn't do was forget who allowed it. By then, the purge of the old oligarch class had done its job. Rivals were gone, frightened, or absorbed. The bigger mystery now wasn't how he enforced control. It was where the money actually sat. Because ruling the system was one thing, but hiding the rewards inside it was something else entirely. By this point, the system was built. Now came the harder part, hiding the reward. On paper, Putin remained strangely modest. His official income looked small for a man sitting at the top of one of the world's largest states. The disclosures showed apartments, cars, salary. The kind of bland inventory you'd expect from a lifelong official. But then you looked up from the paperwork and saw a different life entirely. There were the watches, several of them worth far more than his reported yearly income. There were the planes and helicopters available to him. There were the residences, the private compounds, The endless access to spaces guarded and funded at a level far beyond anything a normal civil servant could touch. None of that by itself proves direct ownership. That's the point. The gap between the documents and the visible reality is where the whole story lives. One of the clearest accounts came from Sergei Kolesnikov, a businessman who later fled Russia. He described a scheme tied to medical equipment and charitable donations, where companies put money into a project that was supposed to serve public good. According to Kolesnikov, the margins were unusually large, and the extra money moved through layers of firms until it reached a structure called Rosinvest. He claimed no major project there happened without Putin's approval, and that most of the entity was effectively controlled for Putin's benefit. Those are his claims, not a court ruling. But they matter because they describe a method, not just an accusation. And then comes the palace. Near the Black Sea, outside Gelinjik, sits an enormous estate that became one of the biggest symbols of hidden rule in modern Russia. Kolesnikov said it began as a retirement residence idea. Then, when retirement no longer looked likely, the plan kept growing until it became something else entirely. A giant compound on state land with layers of security, extravagant interiors, and a scale that looked less like a home than a sealed kingdom. Putin denied any link to it. The Kremlin denied it. At different moments, the property appeared to change hands. But the denials never really solved the deeper question. Because in this world, resale can be part of concealment. That's why direct ownership is often the wrong test. If you ask, can anyone prove Putin's name is on this asset? The answer is often no. If you ask whether trusted associates repeatedly appear around assets that serve him, protect him, and remain unavailable to ordinary law, the answer gets harder to dismiss. Look at Bank Rossiya. US officials once described it as the personal bank for senior figures in Putin's circle. People close to him, men from St. Petersburg and longtime allies, kept showing up around companies, holdings, and offshore routes tied to wealth far beyond anything their public roles explained. One of the more revealing threads in the Panama Papers ran through Sergei Roldugin, a cellist and longtime friend of Putin's. Not a famous tycoon, not a loud political operator, just a low-profile figure linked to complex offshore structures handling huge sums. That didn't prove the money was Putin's. It did show how useful an unthreatening friend can be in a system built on distance. Then there's the number problem. Estimates of Putin's wealth swing wildly. Some investigators put it in the tens of billions. Others went higher. Intelligence-linked reporting has echoed some of those guesses. But nothing close to a final ledger exists. And maybe that's the design. Uncertainty protects the center. If nobody can pin down the amount, then nobody can map the full network. The fog isn't a failure of the system. The fog is part of the system. So when people ask, how much does Putin own? The sharper question is, what does ownership even mean here? It means access without invoices. It means assets held by people who can't safely refuse him. It means protection from scrutiny and the power to reshuffle the chain whenever someone gets disloyal, too visible, or simply inconvenient. In that sense, wealth isn't just money parked in one account. It's command over a hidden web that keeps producing comfort, security, and leverage on demand. But that brings us to the part few dictators like to admit. A machine built on secrecy and fear can protect you for years. It can also trap you inside it. Because once too many fortunes, crimes, and loyalties depend on one man staying untouchable, stepping away stops looking like retirement and starts looking like exposure. By 2008, Putin faced a problem that looked technical but wasn't. Russia's constitution barred a third consecutive presidential term, so he stepped aside. Dmitry Medvedev moved into the presidency, and Putin became prime minister. On paper, it looked legal. In practice, almost nobody thought power had really moved. The arrangement gave him distance without surrender. It also exposed something deeper. A man who built a system around personal control couldn't really trust a future where that control belonged to someone else. For a little while, the swap worked. Medvedev sounded softer, more modern, easier for the West to read. Some people in Moscow even wondered whether the country might loosen a bit. But then came the Arab Spring. Dictators who had looked settled suddenly fell. Crowds filled streets. Governments cracked. Muammar Gaddafi was dragged from power and killed. According to people who watched Putin closely, that hit hard. Imagine being in his shoes. If you believe office is the only thing standing between you and revenge, then every fallen ruler starts to look like a warning. So when the Kremlin announced that Putin would return to the presidency in 2012, many Russians heard something humiliating in the move. It felt arranged in advance, like voters were being informed, not asked. Protests broke out in Moscow and other cities. The crowds weren't big enough to topple him, but they were big enough to show a limit had been crossed. That mattered. He had spent years presenting himself as the answer to instability. Now anger was gathering in the capital itself. The response was familiar and harsher than before. Protest space narrowed. Media pressure deepened. Laws tightened. More enemies were pushed to the edge, and some beyond it. What changed wasn't just repression. It was the logic under it. Leaving office had become harder to imagine because too much now sat behind the walls of the system. Too many deals. Too many people who knew too much. Too many people who had gotten rich under his protection and could become dangerous if that protection slipped. That's why some biographers and investigators describe him as both ruler and captive. He can still direct the state. He can still remove rivals, reward loyalty, and force the country into line. But he also depends on the machine he built, because the machine holds the secrets that make exit dangerous. The question isn't what palace or bank account matters most. It turns out the real possession may be dependence itself. Whole layers of Russia locked into needing him, while he stays locked into needing them. And when growth slowed, that trap got tighter. Anti-West rhetoric rose. Foreign confrontation became more useful. External threats helped justify internal discipline. The system kept moving because tension kept it moving. So the final mystery isn't whether he wants power. It's whether he can survive without it. And what happens to Russia if the answer is no? That palace on the Black Sea tells the story after all. Not because one deed settles everything, but because this system was built so paper can disappear while obedience remains. He turned a country into a network of loyal holders, hidden benefits, and fear. And the strangest part is that the man who seems to control everything may be trapped deeper than anyone around him. If you want more stories about power hiding behind official myths, subscribe and watch the next one.